You do the intros, I guess.
Yep, I'll do the intro, yep.
I'm just going to turn my email, no, when I won't touch it. All right.
For those just joining us, we're just going to wait a couple of seconds before people join and we'll get going.
Your background's better than mine.
Right, we're ready to go. Right, kick off. Welcome everybody, welcome to this webinar today. My name is Philip Aldridge from HASANS, Health and Safety Association. I'll be your host today. And today's webinar is Safely Managing Dangerous Goods and Chemicals, brought to you in association with Responsible Care New Zealand. So we've got Ken Clark here. So welcome, Ken. Let's go to logistics. So people will be on mute and videos off. So just see Ken and myself today. So we'll do a bit of an intro to start from me. Ken will do a presentation for about 20 to 25 minutes. We'll follow by Q&A and discussion. So if you see at the bottom there, you've got a Q&A right in the middle of your screen, right at the bottom of the screen. So please enter your questions there, either now or throughout the session, and we'll endeavour to answer all of them. There's also a chat function if you want to put some information in there as well. So that's about it, really. Yes, the presentation and the recording will be sent out tomorrow. And so you have access to that, so you don't have to take notes. So over to you, Ken.
Brilliant. Thank you, Philip. And I'd just like to thank the whole team actually at HASANS for the invite to speak today, to support I guess the wider coverage of the health and safety strategy that we're working on. Just to start with, we have received a few questions as part of the registration process, which we will be covering, rest assured, and I will save that till near the end. If we haven't covered them already, we probably will. Now, if I could just introduce Responsible Care New Zealand, we're actually the New Zealand Chemical Industry Association, not-for-profit, membership-based organisation to support the chemical industry across New Zealand with training, technical advice, guidance, and of course working with government agencies at all levels to support hopefully what we can achieve and best possible outcomes for everybody. So we actually also operate the National Chemical Emergency Advice Service line, which places us in a really good spot to actually appreciate what's actually reality, what's going on in New Zealand. And I've got some to share at the end. So just to give you a bit of an idea of what's happening out there. So my chief executive, Barry Dyer, he's actually the chair of the International Chemical Council Associations, which actually positions us very well for getting a chair at the global table so that we're not tucked away down the bottom of the globe here, missing out on opportunities for learning and guidance and things like that. It works really, really well. So today's subjects, if you like, I offered up some headings to work with, and we'll make a start. So the theme today, I guess, is just chemicals generally, and they're obviously called different things. Today's focus was hazardous substances and the dangerous goods terminology and some things around that. And a little bit about chemical stewardship overall. It's not a well-known phrase, chemical stewardship. Effectively what that is total ownership, if you like, of the chemical from the time it's imported or manufactured into New Zealand right through to when it's no longer harmful or disposed of, which, as you can appreciate, is a vast number of stages, if you like. Transport being one that is probably on and off several times throughout the life of a chemical, and that's where dangerous goods comes in terms of the terminology. So every stage of the life cycle, we need detailed information about the chemical. And even during research and development, right at the very beginning, the properties are all documented at every step. We need to make sure we follow that right through to the end user, even when it's sitting in the back shed down the garden. So what happens is once it's developed, etc., the end result is known, a known chemical with known properties. Okay, so we've got to own those properties. And it's now must be approved for use in New Zealand before it can enter society for use. This is where EPA come in, and they do an excellent job at applying a chemical classification to it, which downstream forms the basis of how we handle it, how we use it, etc., etc. Right. So in Responsible Care New Zealand, we actually champion good chemical stewardship throughout from all of our members and non-members we're dealing with, and of course government decisions and agencies charged with implementing these decisions. So they aim high, and we should do well. So what are we doing here? I've just got some notes here, as you can probably gather.
Do you want to share the presentation there, Ken?
I beg your pardon, sorry?
Do you want to put your presentation up?
Has it dropped off? My apologies. Thank you for that little bit of help there. Okay.
Just one other thing, panelists, attendees, for some reason we're allowed up to 500 attendees on these calls, but we've only got 100 on. So there might be a few frustrated people out there.
Okay. All right. We'll carry on. Information throughout the life cycle of a chemical. How do we provide that? Right. Very simple terms. We label the product, and we have a safety data sheet. All right, specific to the chemical, or whether it's a chemical, a blend, making it all a usable product for us to use. It's all revealed on the safety data sheet, and the availability of this information is crucial at all times. Hence the recently introduced rules on SDS availability at work. You'll remember in 2017, the hazardous substance regulations were introduced, and that was a time where they actually became law, where you needed to have safety data sheets available. And long overdue, in our opinion, and this should also be at home. There you go, because a number of calls we get is largely from the non-workplace area, and they have no information, and they tend to not have any training either. Just a viewpoint. Okay. Talking about a comparison, if you like, dangerous goods and hazardous substances. A lot of people get confused with these terms. So I've got a bit of a overview here. Hopefully it's going to clarify some blurry lines between dangerous goods and hazardous substances and roughly what they mean, so you can make an informed decision quite quickly. There's GHS looming on the horizon, and I'm going to talk about that in a couple of slides. So the origin of dangerous goods. Dangerous goods refers to chemicals and items, products, if you like, that are in the transport phase. Historically, we transport things in freight, and we called them goods. Many will remember the old goods train, all right? Goods. But it's now commonly referred to as a freight train. But anyway, we're going to talk about the word goods. As time's gone on, things were being moved, and they started to cause incidents. Changes were made at UN level to identify these products and create safe controls during transport, all right, for protect the people, the infrastructure, the environment, and everybody that's transporting them. So over many years, they have framed a legislative framework, which is called the Model Regulations for the Transport of Dangerous Goods. And so that's really where the term dangerous goods starts and finishes, in the transport phase, and it's a complete wraparound framework of regulations to do that safely, whether that's in the air, on land, or on the ocean. Right, in New Zealand, on land is obviously rail and road, and we've got the others as well, maritime and air. Right. For those that don't know, dangerous goods is basically a class system through classes 1 to 9. They all have specific properties, and they're assigned a proper shipping name and a UN number. And there's lots of little quirks around that. For example, if the UN number starts with 0, it's an explosive. If a number is withdrawn because the product is no longer used, it's never ever reissued. All right, so there's no confusions and that sort of thing. It is not solely chemicals. All right, key point. Hazardous substance framework is around chemicals, substances, etc. Dangerous goods can also include products, finished products. For example, if we have a look at, what have I written here? UN number 3090 is lithium metal batteries. There's different ones for lithium ion batteries. 3485, however, is a calcium hypochlorite. So it's not just substances. Anything that's dangerous during transport is regarded as dangerous goods. So it can be a solid 3D item as opposed to...
Can just one second. On your screen, there's a black box covering some of the slide. Do you see that?
What would that be?
Sure it is. Oh, there you go. It's gone now.
That gone?
Yeah, thanks.
Oh, that's actually part of the Zoom.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. All right. So anyway, moving on. And that's, I guess, as far as dangerous goods go, that summarises where the term dangerous goods is applied when it's in transport. Hazardous substances, however, in simple terms, it's a focus on the chemical properties, and it's applied across the entire life cycle, as I mentioned earlier, of individual or blended substances, and it presents more than just what's dangerous for transport. It includes that, but there are more. All right, and they all get equal emphasis. They don't get the sliding scale that people often say when there's a, say, 4 or 5 diamonds on a label or a safety data sheet. People seem to get the impression, subconsciously I'd suggest, that the first one's the most important, the fifth one's the least important. That's not accurate. They are given equal emphasis throughout the life cycle. One of those, maybe 2, will also reflect what is in the transport requirement for that product. All right, so the reasons for that, I'll share that with you, is in transport, for example, if we look at a fuel tanker, when you're following a fuel tanker on the highway, it has a big red flammable diamond on it. If you had a tin of petrol or that tank fell over or something like that and the petrol was released from containment, there are 4 other diamonds apply. Okay, so if you have a chemical spill involving petrol, it's no longer just flammable that you're concerned about. It becomes what we have in New Zealand as a hazardous substance. All right, so it's a little bit blurry, but it's important that you understand that there's more to this product than just flammability. So we put dangerous goods aside for now. I've just been whipped down through my notes here. The product has several hazards associated with it. Not often a problem if the lid stays on, particularly in transport. It's a class 3 flammables, petrol, but as soon as the lid comes off or anything, other rules apply. The same could quickly be said, I guess, for a common event, which is class 8 spills, which we advise on. But the obvious issue is the corrosive diamond, but what is not obvious is what the fumes also do, and those sorts of things, to the human and things around you and things like that. So it becomes more than just the class 8, which you need to be wary of. And that's where the SDS, the safety data sheet, stands out on its own. It's the holy grail in terms of information, immediate information on a product, significantly superior to a dangerous goods declaration because they have limited information relating to transport. But once it's released, like I mentioned, all these other hazards apply and things change. The DG declaration is from point A to point B and an emergency option on that document as to who to contact if there is a problem en route. But that's all it really tells you. You need access to more information pretty quickly. Right. At Chemcall, for example, right now we hold about 250,000 safety data sheets, and they are New Zealand and Australia based, so they're pretty accurate and they're up to date. Anyway, moving right along. That is the, I guess, a overview of the difference between dangerous goods and has-no. DG transport, has-no is the entire life cycle. Right, it swallows up the transport sections as well, but it applies to the chemical in its entirety. Right, how are we doing for time, Philip? We've got another 5-10 minutes. That's about all.
Doing pretty well. Yep, doing pretty well.
Right, the current regulatory environment's pretty busy. I'll quickly whip through this. There's 4 things happening at the moment. NZS 5433, the transport of dangerous goods on land in New Zealand. That should likely be available in the next couple of months. I'm hearing a big update tomorrow from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. who now look after Standards New Zealand. So that's a bit of a milestone coming up for us tomorrow. It won't be a public milestone, it'll just be with the committee at this stage. EPA is currently consulting on the implementation of GHS Revision 7, and there's quite a bit of work to be done there, and they're open for consultation now until August, and I strongly encourage everyone to have a look. They've done a great job on their website in terms of providing good information to show the old and the new. They've grabbed a document and they've given you the clean document, but there's also given you a track document of the proposed changes. So it's actually rather simple, if you like, to blitz through and have a look at the changes. Please do. I've got the link on the last slide to send you straight to the appropriate screen. Okay, 3, MB, they've consulted on 39 adjustments to the HAS subs regs. We are yet to have those, I guess, infiltrating the current HAS subs regulation space, but they're definitely working on those, and some of those are very, very good, very excellent, somewhat. And the 4th, HASANs are leading a project at the moment to develop an entry pathway into having a career as a compliance certifier. Right, there's a ton of work going on in the background there. So if you're thinking about a change of career or something like that, look no further than HASANs. Is that fair, Philip? He's gone on mute. All
Sorry,
right,
I'm on mute. Yeah, it's good. That's good.
Phase 2 review of the HAS subs regs. It's been a bit quiet on that. It was an assurance, I guess, when these were introduced in 2017. That's still yet to happen, but we've now had plenty of time to identify what doesn't work well. So therefore, we should all be making a list so that when it does come up, we can actually table this list quite quickly and address it quickly. Alrighty. Also the Health and Safety at Work Act has subs regs EPA notices. The regs are exceptionally well known. The hazardous substance regs are well known, but the EPA notices are not, despite them also being afforded regulatory outcomes. So they're a powerful document, but they're not well known. The circles I speak in, a lot of people still are unaware that the EPA notices even exist, but they're very good. There's only 7 or 8 of them. It's not a lot, but it's worth seeking them out. If I could emphasize one in particular, where it's called the Hazardous Property Controls Notice. That deals with everything that's not in the workplace, because the HAS subs regs are workplace, nothing else. There's a lot of area in New Zealand society that use chemicals that are not in a workplace. So they're captured in that one. Right, the GHS, very quickly, that's what is part of this consultation with EPA. This is the global version of our HASNO system, and it will be, when it is through and implemented, we will no longer see the likes of the hazard classification numbers that we enjoy at the moment. They look awfully like the dangerous goods transport numbers. They will now be, in the new world, they will be a text phrase, a header. For example, class 6.1a that we know at the moment will be reading an acutely toxic category 1. Right, so there's quite a difference in labelling and safety data sheets, and I guess training, a significant change to the way we've been training. We lose the correlation with the dangerous goods classes, unfortunately. But that's the way the world's going, so we need to roll with it. GHS uptake across the world remains voluntary, whereas DG is mandatory. I've just mentioned lastly the workplace versus non-workplace. Be aware of that. Hazardous Property Controls Notice on the EPA website. Right, where do you find accurate advice and compliance advice, etc.? I think, without blowing trumpets, I think the associations and the networking is by far your very best avenue to get consistent information that works for the government, but also how it's applied in the workplace or the non-workplace. Been in this role now with Responsible Care New Zealand for 7 years, and the best networks, if you like, are where the information is. All right, you have your regulations and your statutes, and you have the people that are frantically trying to make it work. In the middle there, we talk, we form networks, we learn, and we share. All right, this is what today's all about. We're observing a gradual and potentially serious drift in New Zealand, though, where we believe we're slowly losing best practice capability. Approved codes of practice and everything are a bit rare now. The ones designed by industry, these are no longer really available. They're certainly not endorsed at the moment. They were collaboratively put together by industry to abide by the law. That is a bit of a gap now. And a lot of references, consultations, etc., referring directly to the regulations is occurring. But you've got to remember, regulations are a bottom line. You drop below the regulation, you're in breach and you're up for prosecution. So industry needs to design, get out and build things above the regulations, not to the regulations. And the regulations, one set of documents cannot do every single situation. You can't cover a large dairy factory and a fuel station, etc., using exactly the same words. You've got to have design, science, good chemical engineering, sound science to support where you're heading. Right? You cannot use a set of regulations in any field, electrical, gas, hazardous substances, as a design document. All right? They are an absolute minimum, and if we fail to meet that, it's a breach. So, excuse me, I see that as becoming a problem. It's an insidious one, but without codes of practice, good strong engineering, etc., the regulations seem to be a default design document, and I don't see good outcomes following that. To eventually everything's at the level of the regulation, which is your bare minimum. All right. So who do you approach for good advice? Rule of thumb, as I mentioned, the associations, wealth of specialist knowledge within the membership alone, and good contacts. Opens doors, hidden and largely unknown otherwise. All right, and other members help each other willingly. It's actually quite a neat place to be.
A key question for me, Philip here.
Yes.
By industry associations, do you mean responsible care, or do you mean other industry associations like?
I'm generalising about associations, the value of them.
Yeah.
We have got one. All right. Associations generally are great places to go when you're seeking advice, seeking knowledge.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. Okay. The compliance certifiers, for example, they're compliance specialists in chosen fields, and they see a wide spectrum of practices and organisations in their jobs every day. All right, so they would be real good specialists in those areas, which they actually eat, drink, and sleep. They're very good in that. Excuse me, in that space. It sit very well. Right. The key component of my role at technical compliance and emergency advice is to have on tap a significant repository of SMEs, for example, in New Zealand and across the globe. So all of those sorts of things go away in the background. Right now, asking a government agency alone for practical operational knowledge and advice is a pretty tough ask on them. Right, so just be fair on them. They're totally reliant on what they do in their jobs. Regulation is what they develop and enforce. And whilst they can provide advice, etc., like that, it's a bit tough to expect them to be able to explain to you in detail how to operate your business. All right, so
And Kim, my advice, my take too is it's very difficult for government agencies to provide advice. A, don't just have knowledge, but B, if they do have advice, they might just give overall advice, and they don't just want to give specific advice because they might get caught out if things go wrong.
yes,
On the track, particularly WorkSafe, have that sort of challenge. They want to give good advice, but they conscious that if there's a prosecution down the track, they may get caught up in that.
Yep, that's the last thing they want is to get tangled up in something they've given, I guess, is if it's not what we would call accurate out in the field. But like I said, one set of head subs regs, you know, it's a long stretch to try and wrap everything around the word of the law without actually having good risk assessments, good chemical engineering knowledge, personal experience on the jobs, on the tools, applying all of that to inform decisions, and passing the regs on the way through. But they should. It's the benchmark. It's not a benchmark. It's the bottom line before you get yourself into trouble. Puts very simply, you just engineer your ergonomics in as you go along in your design. Issues frustrating? And effective training. I've chucked in there the phrase effective training versus compliance training. I can see the difference sitting here, where you get a likes of a course that is built around, again, the regulations, heavy emphasis on fines and imprisonments, etc. Not a great deal about what the people actually do on the job. Right. A good balance, you know, do you actually need that sort of thing with the audience you're dealing with? It seems to be extremely common. Excuse me. So we just need to be aware of the quality of the training, or the content, not the quality, but the content of the training is balanced. And it actually reflects what the people are doing, not just ticking a box for compliance or NZQA, for example. A little bit more on DG and training. DG, for example, if you only teach the DG rule, it sits in amongst a much broader context of obligations and expectations, including the Health and Safety at Work Act. For example, has subs regs as well. If you are operating a truck and you put a ISO portable tank on it and then try and operate it as a tank wagon, you're actually in breach of the law, and those rules are in there for an extremely good reason. And if the driver's not briefed on both and taught about it, the whole thing, they're exposed, but also your entire organisation and the community is exposed in that scenario because of what you're hauling. So you've got to be really aware of just what sort of statutory obligations and everything you actually do in the wider field. What is good?
Ken, you've got about 5 minutes left.
5 minutes?
Yep.
Okay. What does good training look like at a glance? Well, here's an ideal view, I guess, is people sit down with you and say, actually find out what you do to begin with and show you training material before you start. You know, does it actually hit the spot? Does it do what we need in this organisation? Or is it just going to give us an NZQA unit standard, or it's going to meet the regs, for example? A lot of emphasis around Regulation 4.5. And this is, it's quite powerful, actually. I see it a lot. I hear it a lot. Now, when we lost the approved handler regime, okay, there was pluses and minuses, and it was thrashed out and argued out. Regulation 4.5 is regarded by the government as a replacement, if you like, of the approved handler training. Now, you can actually deliver Regulation 4.5 within your organisation without having special courses perceived as passing Regulation 4.5. If you have a good comprehensive training program in your organisation, have a look at Reg 4.5. There's every chance in the world that you're delivering it. All right, they're pretty hot on evidence, just like all statutory requirements these days. But if you're delivering the good training, good resources, availability of resources, bit of evidence, you know, you're there. You're there. You don't actually need to do special courses to do one regulation. You've got to do the whole lot. It's a big book. Okay, the loss of the approved handler, very quickly. In fact, will I even go into that? Probably not.
Time.
Running out of time. Okay, we'll move on from that. Just be aware the certified handler does not replace the approved handler. All right, it's a new, completely different driver. Right, key requirements for inventory, compliance STS, product labels, effective emergency planning, independent validation, verification on the screen. All right, we had a few scenarios. I'll just give you a few. Have I got time? A few incident scenarios. Blue herbicide tracer was put in rural water supplies and gone through everybody's drinking water. Stolen chemicals dumped on rural driveways. Spilt 200-litre drums on South Island Highway with no labels. IBCs falling off trucks in Auckland, going down the drains. Drums falling off pallets and forklifts, many damage, splashing, burning the driver. Now reacting and overwhelming everybody in the warehouse. Closed the door, called the fire brigade. All the smoke coming out the doors. Freight train wagon, side torn open, ripping chemical bladder open, losing the entire contents. Phosphorus bottles exploding on a building development site in New Zealand. Chemical leaking from truck trailer on the ferry deck. Heavily pregnant woman was wood surfacing and overcome by solvents found by her husband. Dementia patients drinking cleaning chemicals. Sadly, one of the more common calls, usually in the middle of the night. 9-month-old naked baby sprayed by a 3-year-old brother with dad's metal cleaning chemicals. Hydrofluoric acid splash in the face during needle treatment. Mercury switch broken by a sparky over a drinking water heater tank. Formaldehyde smashed bottles in the school laboratory. And last one, white chemical leaving an unattended chemical factory yard into a street drain out through security gates. So there's plenty out there still that need good focus. All right. Consistency, certainty, competency, cost effectiveness. That's what we're looking for. That's a list of resources I suggest you might want to look at. These are direct to pages I think would be valuable. One in the middle there is Novachem. That is actually an excellent agrochemical manual which I use regularly. It's got everything about every ag chem in New Zealand. It's a subscription thing, it's not free. All right, so there's some resources there. Now your turn, I've got some questions.
Yep, Ken, do you want to take down the, stop sharing the screen?
Oh, okay. I can do that.
Thanks guys, thanks for that presentation, Ken. Very useful. Got about a few questions, quite a few popping in, so that's great. Some about dangerous goods transport and use of dangerous goods. There's a couple here around that. So, what about batteries?
Oh, sorry.
Batteries and disposal.
Sorry, what was that?
Do batteries need a DG to transport for disposal?
Lead acid batteries with lead in them over certain volumes, and they are in the fact sheet on the NZTA website. Specifically mentions batteries. NZTA,
great. Question here from Joe around, is there regulations around footwear when using dangerous goods, steel caps or something else?
Not specifically in the HAZSUBs regs. You've got to have appropriate protective clothing. In the explosives area, there are certain footwear and everything that are pretty mandatory. Static electricity, etc. But to my knowledge, no, that is a company decision.
Probably wise anyway, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be honest. This might be a long, quick, you probably can't answer this in 5 seconds or 3 seconds. Can you discuss what is involved with building requirements for storage of hazardous and dangerous good products?
Sorry, you're going to have to ask that again. I just got distracted.
Sorry. Could you please discuss what is involved with building requirements for the storage of hazardous and dangerous goods products?
Very simply, I would strongly suggest you seek out a compliance certifier to discuss this with, because it's wide and varied. There are different types of buildings for storage, and there are different grades for buildings, workrooms, etc. So they basically, in very simple terms, a building to store hazardous substances will be a type A, B, C, or D. If you're working with those hazardous substances, take the lids off, for want of a better phrase, and you're using them for chemicals, there'll be a type 1, 2, or 3 building requirement. And they are very different. They're around rated walls, doors, etc. like that, electrical fittings, and the types of chemicals that you're actually storing.
Next step. There's one for me, Ken. As some of you may know, HAZANS is working on a pathway, a career development, a training pathway for new certifiers. So we're just kicking that off now. Some background is a lot of the people getting old and retiring, and there's a reducing number of compliance certifiers. So we're trying to build a competency framework and a training program over the next year, 18 months. So it's really early days in terms of what we're doing there, but it's on track. So if you've got any more information about that, you can talk to me or Hazardous Substances Professionals Association. On for you, Ken, what is the expected time frame for the introduction and implementation of the GHS in New Zealand?
Okay, It's been an ongoing thing now for some years, and the proposed implementation, I can answer that. I'm sure it is, no, I'd need to answer that accurately. I've got the document right here beside me. It's actually, I'll just give you, the document's title is Implementation of GHS 7. Implications for hazardous substance approvals and group standards, consultation document number 2, June 2020. That's actually got the proposed time frame in it, and I just, look, October comes into my head, but that's not this year, obviously. But
we can always send it out afterwards, Ken.
It needs to be, that's the one you want. Yep.
Okay, cool. There's a question around, a couple of questions around approved handlers and certified handlers, and what's the difference, and is the one better than the other?
Okay, the approved handlers, they were introduced a long time ago, and they were looking after effectively classes 1 through 5 routinely, and that was revoked, as you'll be well aware now, in December 2017, and a new role was created. It was not to replace the approved handler. It was to emphasise the need around Class 6, which is your acutely toxic products. Government of the day put a lot of work into emphasising or renewing an old emphasis into health, because when health and safety came into place in 1993, health almost disappeared very quickly. The health nurses and everything like that on the jobs went very much safety, physical things. The health part of it kind of disappeared, and it was a concern of mine for many, many years. After Pike River, the renewal, etc., a big emphasis was highlighted that there was no real focus on health in the workplace. So that was a big lot of work that went into these regulations. And some of that was, well, what about all this really toxic stuff? You know, we don't have approved handlers, but we've got to generate a real strong focus on training and performance with this product to improve our health outcomes in this country. And that was the, I guess, the basis for the certified handler form.
Thanks for that. A couple of political questions, giving you some advice there, Ken, given that we are recording this and it might be public. How do you think WorkSafe are performing in the hazardous substances area currently? Giving advice, spotting issues, understanding regulations.
Fine.
Fine.
Look, it's a big beast. It's a big beast. They've got to work with what we've got. It was all brought over from EPA. I'm focusing just on hazard subs here. The EPA regs, etc., were all put into one set of regulations. There was some jiggery-pokery before it actually came out in print, and that's what they have to deal with. All right. At the same time, we now have a critical shortage of compliance certifiers, and that is certainly not helping the situation. That is being addressed with, as we've mentioned earlier, with HAZANS, and everybody has their own opinion, and I'm sure we've all got this opinion that are logged in today.
That's great.
Where we sit, we have a great relationship with WorkSafe, with EPA, and we actually have a lot of successes. So I'm going to leave it there because I hear both sides of this camp, and when we just basically nod.
Okay, that's good, Ken. Thanks for that. Very appropriately answered. Here's another one for you. Given the estimated rate of injury, I think it's mainly health-related injuries of 600 to 900 deaths a year, plus 35,000 injuries, which is related to health. Do you think there's a case for the government having hazardous substance specialist advisors and enforcement?
In enforcement?
And enforcement, yeah. So basically saying we've got all these, we've got 60 to 80 acute harm, and then we've got about 900 health-related harm. Do you think the case for hazardous substances advisors and greater enforcement?
I think the model that is there intends to achieve that, where workplace inspectors actually have the capability to do hazardous substances as well. There are specialists. They tend to have been around a bit longer and understand the game a bit more, but the others, I believe, are being trained up. In theory, they should be able to do occupational health, my understanding here, occupational health, hazardous substances, and of course the workplace safety. It's a big ask of one inspector, and I doubt you can, but it's certainly a specialist field, and I'm confident they're actually working to do that.
Yes, and one inspector can't do everything, and I think they've got specialist teams behind them. They have occupational hygienists behind them, and they've got other people behind them.
I had a specialist health and safety role within the New Zealand Fire Service for a number of years, and I realised leaving that and going into hazardous substances that HAZ subs alone is enormous. And to factor in that with transport as well, with its own set of rules, you could not ask an inspector to do anything more than that if they specialised in it. It's not possible.
Right. There's a couple of Q&A questions that might be, you might want to read out, Ken, if you can bring them up. One from Janice.
I've got those three that you sent through.
No, it's on the Q&A one. One about 8.3a has no classification. Got those.
Where's the most recent? At the top? At the bottom? At the bottom.
Top.
I'm sorry, I can't see the one you're looking for.
Okay. You read them, or you got them, or have I got slowed it out to you? There's one around 8.3a, has no classification, which gives GHS pictograms corrosive on the label, but is non-DG for transport. Is that the correct process?
Yes, because 8.3a is eyes only. All right, so if you look at it in the transport phase, rocking on down the highway, that classification doesn't actually apply. The corrosive nature is 8.3 is targeted specifically for the eye tissue.
That's about eyes, great. Another one from Norman, thanks Norm. Norman, is it COP 2/1 still being used for warning signs? UN has subs information is shown in the signage.
Which COP is it, sorry?
It's COP 2/1, still being used for warning signs.
In terms of what the codes of practice that were approved, they are still good. They will refer to older legislation, but the thresholds, etc., are unchanged.
Cool. So run around chemical disposing. We've got another 15 minutes left of chemical disposing. SDS normally says contact local regulation. Where or what is the best place for that advice?
Every regional council and city council have a obligation to provide disposal of hazardous substance waste. And we've just actually completed an exercise for the background and chemical to renew all of the regional council 24/7 contact numbers, so they are all there. And I suggest if you don't get a good answer, I mean, a lot of, what do you call them? Waste transfer stations, the old dump. They actually have an obligation to make sure that that's not going into the landfill. So not all, but a lot of those people have those in hand. Your council, in answer to your question, I guess, your regional council, they're the ones who are into pollution, resource management, etc.
Great, regional councils, thanks for that. Again, around a question about advice, I suppose. What is the best location to find out the rules or guidelines for transportation of bulk hazardous goods?
Bulk hazardous goods, bulk dangerous goods.
Bulk hazardous is written, but it might mean dangerous as well.
Okay, we better cover both. All right, New Zealand Transport Agency website for the dangerous goods transport. If the product you are carting is also captured under what we currently call HAZNO, I would strongly suggest you look at the hazardous substance regs as well. because that deals directly also with bulk hazardous substances on vehicles, either in portable tanks, large portable tanks, IBCs obviously, or the tank wagons. So there's a big crossover there, and it's important you capture those. But they're the two statutes, if you like, regulations.
So mainly NZTA and WorkSafe, are they correct?
NZTA website, the dangerous goods rule, all right, the dangerous goods rule, which is effectively the truck, the trailer, and the fit for purpose, safe to drive on the road, etc. Once you put a tank on board with hazardous substances in it, the hazardous substances regs apply in large volumes.
Right. Okay, here's one about location certs. Does my workplace need a person in charge if we do not have the quantities to require a location certificate?
The phrase person in charge actually didn't come across. So it used to be a legal term, person in charge, okay, under the has no regulations. It didn't come across into the has subs regs. Pretty confident with that. A person in charge always, I mean, it's team leader stuff, specifically for hazardous substance regs.
Yep.
The only person that's dedicated would be a laboratory man in a laboratory.
Okay, something more relevant. Okay, some other questions come through on chat, Ken. The question from Lily around SDS requirements. Will there be communication around the changes to SDS requirements that we can send out to our customers?
Will there, sorry, Philip, one more time. Will there be change?
I don't know enough about the question, but it sounds like there are changes to SDS requirements. And she's asking, will there be a communication around that she can send out to her customers?
When it goes has no to GHS, I would very strongly, yeah, what you need to do in this case is go onto the EPA website and download from their consultation link. There is a series of these EPA notices that I mentioned earlier. One of those is dedicated to safety data sheets, and that is law in New Zealand around safety data sheets. The best place to go because it all goes downstream from there. That is based on GHS at UN level.
So off the EPA website?
Absolutely. That second to last slide that had those links on it, one of those takes you directly to the consultation page with all the documents on it. I cut through the trees for you if you like, and I went right through and got the last link.
Okay, cool. One question about lithium-ion batteries, like e-bikes. So asking, is there a limit on numbers that can be stored in one place, like a DG cabinet?
At the moment, Philip, it's new. There is nothing around this at the moment. It has been raised by us, Responsible Care New Zealand, with New Zealand Transport Agency, to embrace that when they review the dangerous goods rule. And the reason for that is these are becoming transported, they're sold secondhand, they're courier delivered, all of those sorts of things. They should be being captured in the dangerous goods rule, because lithium-ion batteries have their own UN numbers, they have their own packing requirements, etc. when they're transporting them for hire or reward. The main freights, PBTs, etc., the couriers. When you sell them on Trade Me, etc., there is really little control around that at the moment. So at the moment, there's no real easy way to say that. In New Zealand, the dangerous goods transport standard almost out, 5433. We've actually included a section in that on lithium batteries and how to work out what our ratings, etc., because they are the thresholds that will be in the dangerous goods rule. So we're front-footing it a little bit.
Excellent. Question from Emily, thanks Emily, around multi-element gas containers. Yes. So Do you see that question? It's on the chat. So classifying a multi-element gas container for mobile storage of a flammable gas consists of several cylinders manifold together within the frame. Would this be treated as a tank wagon or a transportable container within the rigs?
I'd have to work through it step by step. It would be a bit bold for me to make an answer on that one because, for example, a portable tank, once it's on wheels, it's a tank wagon for the purpose of regulations. So it needs to actually be phased through. There is no answer to it exactly. We'd need to work through it. Volumes, pressures, etc. like that. And purpose, storage, whether it's going on a truck.
Here's a question from Carla. She works for a company that sells chemicals. What can they do when we know other companies are selling tracked chemicals to people without a certified handling certificate? She says she has turned people away, they just drive down the road and buy the product.
Unfortunately, I've heard this more than once. A little bit in the ag chem area, a little bit in other ones as well. And your first port of call has to be WorkSafe.
Yeah, that's right.
A government agency, and it is WorkSafe's situation. A little wee word on tracking. A lot of tracked substances, a lot of substances that have the tracked classification, 61A, 61B, just be sure with the original EPA decision document that they were required to be tracked. There's a lot of chemicals out there that had the tracking classification in the previous regime, but weren't required to be tracked at the original acceptance decision by EPA. And that is found on the EPA controls website. Does it need to be tracked, yes or no? Best place to start.
Question from Sam around safety data sheets. Says up to 20 pages long.
Yes.
Saying realistically no one's going to read them. Are you still allowed to use cheat sheets for end users like farmers?
Well, the regs say that you can actually have reduced size safety data sheets. However, a lot of site visits I do, I find fault with them just about every time because the author of the cheat sheet, dare I say it, is using it from their perspective, and they tend to do it when everything's going. Without thinking, they write what needs to be on the cheat sheet, and they forget about their own space because they don't actually understand what can go wrong in their space because they do it every day. So what I'm getting at is when there is an event in their space, they pull out the cheat sheet, and the bit that's missing is the bit they need. So the safety data sheet, whilst it's 20 pages long, sounds pretty impressive. I stand strongly by the fact that an SDS is your hand life cycle Bible for that product for any given time on the life of that product. I don't see you can cheat sheet it because you're going to be missing something at some given time in the life of the chemical.
Again, on SDSs, safety data sheets, look like they've given out, still using and given out non-GHS data sheets.
Yes.
I advise that might have to change the format on 31 August next year. Is that correct?
The format itself has been required to be a HAZNO compliant, which we accept GHS, obviously, because HAZNOs and GHS are synonymous, I guess is the phrase, with the exception of the numbering and the phraseology. The format of the SDS, it's law now. They should be GHS compliant. That's the only answer. If they're coming in and they're not GHS compliant, EPA is your next port of call because they still hold the authority on the safety data sheet compliance. This is not a WorkSafe situation. WorkSafe makes sure they're at the workplace. EPA makes sure they are good, if you like, for use in New Zealand.
Yep. Based on your experience, Ken, what are the most common types of accidents that occur? You know, spills, burns?
By a country mile, people. By a country mile, it's eye injuries. It's almost cyclic. If it's summertime, it's often in the agricultural field where farmers are out doing spraying or dipping. And if I get called, say, after 11 at night through till time I get up, it's just about always the hospitality industry, doing cleanups after they close the bar, the restaurants and those sorts of things. But we often get, as I mentioned earlier, rest homes. We get a lot of calls from rest homes, and it's elderly patients drinking stuff they shouldn't actually be able to get access to, and often it's cabinets not locked. So they are I would suggest, eyes just pop up every time, Philip, all the time.
Yep.
Periodic ingestions, but the eyes have it.
Cool. Is there time for 12 questions? Got a few more questions, but I'll try and get through most of them. Is there such thing as a has no classification course or training?
No. Has no classification course. That would basically be how to learn to classify. That's with absolute respect to everybody, that's a chemist role or someone that's highly qualified in that area to do it well. There is a book out which EPA developed. Dr. Susan Colley had a lot to do with it, on how to assign a has no classification. That would be the alternative if there was one. But that's soon to be superseded as GHS progresses.
Okay. I'll have a couple more and we'll wrap up. If we have a 8.1A classified substance, can we use corrosive group standards which show skin and metal corrosive?
One more time, didn't hear it quite.
If we use 8.1A,
yes,
which is a metal corrosive area, only substance, can we use corrosive group standards which show skin and metal corrosive?
If you read the first or second page as you go in, it'll have a list of classifications that you must have in your product, but it doesn't have to have them all. So I'm pretty confident that will give you the answer you seek.
Okay. One more. If around dangerous goods signage, if dangerous goods signage isn't required on a vehicle, but the substance is used on the work site, i.e. a concrete mixer, has no warning required.
Often is the case, yes. There's quite a number of situations where something is not dangerous for transport, but it's regarded as hazardous to the workplace. Very common. And I was just about to say something else there. Anyway, it's gone.
Great.
I have one question, which was, is there a particular chemical or class of chemicals that account for the eye injury, for most of these injuries? That's the secondary to my first question. It's the corrosive, in the eyes area, it's the cleaning products predominantly. Is there a particular chemical or product? It's 99% of the time, I guess, alkali, basic, as opposed to acid, which you must remember also that if you have alkali in your eyes and you're washing it out, the proteins that are released from your eye tissue actually keep the pH level elevated quite a lot longer than an acid. So you should actually double the time you do your flushing. That's what we recommend.
Great. Okay, that's all we've got time for. People, thanks for attending the conference, and apologies to some people. We had a large number of registrations. Technical issue back in over 100 people on the call today, so we might get a few grumpy emails, and we might have to do something for them another time. But thank you for your time.
It is available on recording, though, isn't it, from your website?
Recording, yeah. So, Ken, any final comments from you?
I'd just like to take the opportunity and think that this webinar platform is a great way of actually getting little snippets out as it's real time and everything like that. So comments, I just thank everybody for logging on, and I hope today actually did justice to what you logged on for, and that you're going to take a whole different view on dangerous goods and hazardous substances. There you go.
Yeah, any feedback, send it to info@hasends, info@hasends.org.nz, and we can look at our future topics or future areas. So thank you, Ken, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Roddy.
Hope you have a good day and a good week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.